Hi everyone. I'm the warm-up act for Tom's talk, good morning. No slides, as I told Luca. No one ever came back from a conference and said they didn't see enough slides. So, no slides. I'll be peeking at my phone. So, first of all, I wanted to thank once again Sam and Node Guardians and Greg and Only Dust for setting this up. Once again, a beautiful event. And I think it's turning into a tradition, and you'll hear more about next steps in this tradition. Today there's a different nationality mix here. I'm not going to get to do as much of my favorite activity that I did yesterday, which is to walk up to groups of people speaking French and interrupt their conversation. To just repeatedly break up the conversation. So unfortunately, there's not only French people here today. So, and another thing I wanted to mention, North Star is here with his wife on their honeymoon. Okay. Now, there, as an entrepreneur, I want to say I never thought that I'd be doing something where women on honeymoon are sort of dragged into the mix. So, next up is people proposing on. I'm spoken for, but if, other people want to. So, okay, so I want to say this. So, there's been a lot of progress made since we sort of met around ETHCC at the first StarkNetCC and the hackathon in Amsterdam. There's been a lot of progress, and there's been a lot of bumps in the road. And I want to talk about the bumps in the road for a second, because I think that often people sort of in the general excitement of adopting new stuff, they sort of implicitly assume that it's going to be nonlinear every step of the way. And software development, like most professions I think you want to engage in, is not a linear sort of output business. Sometimes it's super linear, and those are the very exciting moments. And there's Cairo for me as an example of like a super linear step. And sometimes they're sublinear. You go on some tangent and you explore some new step in the stack, and it leads to a dead end, and you've wasted weeks or months, and it's aggravating, and it's I think it's very important to remember this. That we're in a nonlinear business, and that does not mean it's always super linear. And we've seen in past weeks, for example, Gurley has been in sort of a frustrating experience in terms of its performance. Speak closer to the mic. Gurley has been in sort of a frustrating experience for developers. And for us as well. I think what's important in this context is to sort of make sure that we work together to fix it. And I think that's exactly what happened, meaning a whole bunch of people kept communicating this frustration. And of course, we should have, I think, acted, that's almost always true, earlier than we did. But say last Thursday, we spun up another network. And then there was a whole bunch of things that had to happen around that. And that's not the super linear solution. That's not like the Holy Grail. That's a Band-Aid. But it's a Band-Aid that may offer builders weeks and maybe months of peace of mind to develop better. And the beautiful thing that happened around that and around the hackathon that sort of sprung out of nowhere on Friday and ended yesterday with about a dozen beautiful presentations. The beautiful thing that happened is that, of course, spinning up a new network isn't sort of a trivial step in the sense that the block explorers and the wallets and the full node and everything needs to be adjusted. And people sort of, there's this beauty to a nascent ecosystem where people just sort of open their laptop and say, what do you need? Regardless of whether they're in airport terminals or it's the middle of the night, etc. And someone wrote on Telegram, it's not a hackathon, it's an ecosystem hacking, which is sort of a very sort of beautiful way of looking at it. So, I sort of wanted to share that sentiment that these bumps in the road, we acknowledge them and we're going to get through them. And you'll hear from Tom in a couple of minutes about sort of the road ahead, specifically in the context of improving performance and what's ahead for Cairo 1.0 and how we intend to make Regenesis as painless as possible. In terms of action items, I guess for the community, I think what's very important is that people keep on bringing up new ideas and taking new initiatives. And now with the foundation and a whole bunch of people in the ecosystem, and I think they're all well-known characters, initiate, suggest, for example, the Only Dust team put together, I think, a very compelling presentation on a bunch of challenges in the ecosystem. And they're going to take steps now in terms of making sure that some of those problems actually are combined into some sort of solution. So we would love to hear, and I think the foundation would love to hear, of initiatives that you want to take if you're missing documentation, if you're missing tooling, if whatever it is you need, and you want to take action and start building those things, please come forward and propose, and the resources are in place to support that. That's basically it on my end. Last but not least, I want to say that there's Louis. Hello, Louis. So we're organizing a week in Tel Aviv in early February that will include a StarkNetCC. Stay tuned. You don't need to pack much. Winters in Tel Aviv look like this, pretty much. But that's sort of in the works, just so you know. That's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
So I'm Tom. For those of you who don't know, I'm the product lead of StarkNet at Starkware. And today I want to share with you the roadmap for the next couple of months. I mean, what are the top priorities that we have internally at Starkware, and hopefully how it will look like. I think I don't have a lot of time, but hopefully there will be some time for questions at the end, and if not, then I'm here, and you can also see my handle in every application, so you're also welcome to reach out. Yes, so let's start. I can also do it without presentation, but does this work? Okay, great. So the three top priorities, at least the way we see it, the way I see it for StarkNet, and the way we currently spend our resources are three things. One is to improve the performance of the network, and I will deep dive into it, what it means, what does need improving and what not, but this is, for me, the topmost priority. The second priority is to work to release Cairo 1 as soon as possible, and I will have a short update on that. And the third thing is to have a seamless Regenesis to ensure that we go through this process, which is necessary in my opinion, and we do it in a way which is as seamless as possible to users and developers. So let's start with performance improvements. Now, the nice thing about performance is that on one hand, we feel the lack of improvement here for a long time, but on the other hand, I'm really optimistic about it because, as you will see, I think that StarkNet, specifically and Validity rollups in general, has the biggest advantage on that front, right? So first thing to note about the performance is that maybe, opposed to what you might be thinking, the problem is not the prover. So the prover is not the bottleneck in any way, in shape and form. And why is that? So first of all, we have a really good provers. I mean, the Stark prover, specifically the technology and the provers that are used in StarkNet are really, really performant. The second thing is that Cairo, which is the underlying VM of StarkNet, of all the execution of the StarkNet OS and the StarkNet smart contract, was built specifically to be efficient in proving. And you can also see it in the proof generation. And the last thing is that we have recursion. So it's actually contrary to what might be intuitive. The more load and the more throughput and the more transactions that we have, the performance will be even better, right? The finality time of the proofs reaching to mainnet will be faster and things will be cheaper. So on that front, when I'm talking about performance improvements, it's not about improving the approval, even though there is, of course, stuff to be done there, but it's focusing solely on the sequencers. The second note is that, as I mentioned, StarkNet actually allows us to have a performance roadmap, right? As opposed to any other blockchain, which at some point you reach a limit where you need to decide either you improve the performance but lose the ability of full nodes to keep up with the network, or just stay with the performance that you have. Validity rollup does not have this choice to make. And why is that? The simple reason is that full nodes does not execute the transactions, but actually just verify proofs, right? And since verification is much, much cheaper than the computation itself, it's actually logarithmic, then we can increase the throughput and the performance of the sequencers without losing decentralization and the basic security properties of the network. So this property makes me very optimistic in the long run that we'll just be able to constantly improve on that front. Okay, so those are two nodes. Now, what are actually the plan? So in the coming month, let's say 3 to 5 months, the three major things that we're going to work and ship are those three things. First of all, parallelization, and then basically rewriting the whole stack in Rust in a performant implementation. So the first point is the Cairo VM, and the second one is the rewrite of the sequencer. So what does parallelization mean? There are a few ways to approach parallelization in blockchains. The way we approach it currently in StarkNet is by doing optimistic parallelization. It means that you try to execute many transactions in parallel until you just can't. To explain what it means, let's say we have 4 cores, and we try to execute 4 transactions in parallel instead of 1, right? This is how it is done today. So we try to execute them, and then at some point, we see that one of the transactions is dependent on another transaction. What does it mean? Maybe the first transaction wrote to a storage cell that the second transaction tried to read from. So in that case, we do a very simple cancellation of the transaction, and we just re-execute it after the dependency graph is cleared, right? That the first transaction has finished. But even though we failed this transaction, we got 3 transactions instead of 1. So this is the general idea. The status is that we're in final stages of tests. You can see it here, or you can't, but you can believe me that you can see here something. And the plan is to release it, the first version of it, is to release it this week on integration, and hopefully next week on Gerlis, and a week after that on mainnet. So that's that. The Cairo VM in Rust. So Lambda class, I think Uri also mentioned them in the last StarkNetCC, have been working on an implementation of the Cairo VM, which is in the underlying VM, as I've said, that execute all the transactions and the blocks, which is a very important component to make more performant. So they worked in implementation in Rust, and this was finished. And now they are in the final stages of wrapping it in Python to allow the existing tooling and the existing sequencer, which still hasn't transitioned, which still operates in a Python environment, to incorporate it as is. So, yeah, the status of it is that we're also, I think, almost there. Hopefully in a few weeks we'll be able to start releasing some proof of concept versions of DevNet, of Protostar, and hopefully also of our sequencer to see if it works and people can start interacting and give feedback. So that's that. And the last part is the sequencer rewrite. And actually, I wanted to also give like a brief history, but Sylv did it amazingly, which actually was very exciting lecture to see. But when we originally thought on how to approach the development of StarkNet, I think we started in January last year. There were basically two options. Either we like spend a lot of time developing like the full network, trying to spec it out and have something to release to the developers, to you, which is ready and have all the features, or just build on the existing infrastructure and try to ship fast and learn. And this is basically the history that you've seen on Sylv lecture, right? So the first version that we released basically had contracts with storage variables and function and nothing other than that, and we constantly improve the system. Now, the pros of this approach is that we can have this amazing event today, right? If we didn't start it back then, none of this could have happened. But maybe one of the disadvantages of this approach is that we used an existing infrastructure which was not built for that, right? So this leads us to the last project that I want to talk about, which is a shiny new sequencer, right? So basically taking the sequencer that we have today, rewriting it from scratch, with the first thing in mind is for it to be more performant, but also for it to be in a new public repo that anyone can at one time spin up a sequencer and use it. And this is a project that we're planning to start this month, hopefully the second week of November, or this week. And as with previous projects that we did, we plan to do it like in small milestones and to release it. I don't want to give like an ETA, but hopefully, never mind, soon. Okay. Great. So this is all I have to say on the work we're doing with regards to performance in the upcoming 3 to 6 months. Maybe before I move to Cairo, does anyone have a quick question? Okay, great. So the second focus point that we have is working on Cairo 1 and working on releasing it. We've been working on it since actually a bit before, but since we announced it on July on StarkNetCC. And just a reminder what its two main goals. So the first goal is to have a much better developer experience, right? To have a proper high-level language that has, cool stuff like for loops and maybe more stuff even. And the second thing is to have Sierra. And in one line, what is Sierra? Sierra basically ensures that every transaction can be proven. Okay. We plan to open the repo of the work to the public this month, on November, sorry, not October. Luca told me to mention that. And hopefully the release of the first version, which will be the minimal version that allows porting the existing StarkNet contract to Cairo 1, will be released by the end of the year. And when we release that, it will allow us to start working towards the Regenesis, which is the third focus point that we have for the upcoming months. So again, why do we want a Regenesis? There are two important factors. The first one is that we want to have a system that only has Cairo 1 contracts. And specifically, we want to have a system that all the contracts were written with Sierra. Why do we want that? We want that so every transaction can be included in a proof and be proven. And this is a very important property for when we want StarkNet to be decentralized. So this is the first point. The second point is that we want to start from a new Genesis block. And the main reason for that is, as I've said, we had many, many versions. And there were many breaking changes and changes to the structure and transactions that we had and now we don't. So it makes syncing and having tooling very, very complicated. So we want to start from a new Genesis block that will have a snapshot of the state, and nodes can just start from it. So how do we want to do it? And again, here I'm just really going in high level. We published some posts that explain it, and if it's not clear yet, you're very welcome to come and talk with me. But I highlight to Kuba from Software Mention for coming with this elegant solution. But basically, the way we want to approach Regenesis is to start what we call a transition period after we publish the Cairo 1 compiler. And in this transition period, there will have to be three things that need to be done. The first thing is the developer implementations or application implementations from old Cairo to new Cairo, right? Once this will end, and I hope this will take between, 2 to 4 months, and we'll see based on feedback from the community what is the pace, what are the blockers, etc. We'll basically end the transition period, and after we end it, we will only allow Cairo 1 contract execution, and we will start from a new Genesis block. Now, the nice thing about this approach is that there will be no migration to a new network, there will be no state reset, and there will be no downtime to any app, with one caveat that if you already are deployed and you don't have any upgradability mechanisms, then there needs to be some maybe tailored solution for you. And again, come talk with me and we'll see how we can make it happen. But other than that, those are the benefits. And it actually allows the applications to deploy today with some upgradability mechanism. So that's it. Just to what you should expect in the upcoming 3 to 6 months. So from the performance improvement side, we'll release the first parallelization version next week to Gurley, and we'll keep improving it. We'll incorporate the new Cairo VM implementation in the existing tooling, and we'll start working on a new sequencer and hopefully release a version of it soon. We will see the Cairo 1 release, hopefully by the end of the year. And after this release, we will basically begin the Regenesis period with the beginning of the transition period and then the end of it with the new Genesis block. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much for everything.